Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people, dealing with topical issues, and we welcome in a pretty important guy today.
Well, yes, we all kind of sit
How
up
did
a
you
little
get this guy
straighter.
to come in and visit with us?
Well, I told him I was somebody else, and he readily agreed to come when he thought I was.
That'll do it.
Yeah. I used that pseudonym.
If your own name doesn't work, try another one.
Yeah, and whom it is we're talking about, of course, is the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the Honorable John Reif. He's here to discuss what's going on out at the court. We have followed a tradition of every couple of years asking the relatively new Chief Justice to come on and tell us about their view of the court. We want to talk to him about independence of the judiciary, what's going on at the court, what's going on around the court that affects the operation of the court. And I think you'll find this a very informative show.
Chief Justice John Reif, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
What I can offer is insight into understanding the Native American art, how these artists are expressing themselves as cultural people. I am Heather Ottone. I'm a Native American researcher and curator, and I am Chickasaw. I can remember in first grade the teacher saying, "Well, you're so lucky you don't look Indian." That was difficult to hear, because it was what I was. It's what I am. I think there's a renaissance going on amongst the tribes. I think the Chickasaws are leading that. We didn't die. We're not gone. So what are we now? And what can we do now to start to form that identity, to survive into another century? And to have the culture guiding us into that future, that would be significant.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today we're honored to have on the set of The Verdict the Honorable Chief Justice John Reif of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Justice Reif did his undergraduate work and law work at the University of Tulsa. He grew up in Tulsa. He was for a while a police officer in the city of Owasso. He started his service in the judiciary in 1981 as a special judge, moved on up the ladder through the Court of Civil Appeals and up to the Supreme Court. He's stood for retention election in Oklahoma a large number of times and been retained every time by an overwhelming margin. And those of us that are active in the law practice understand that's why that's true. In January of 2015, Justice Reif was selected as the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And as I say, each time we have a new Chief Justice, we ask them to come on and kind of get their view of what's going on, what's important to talk about, what they think you might be interested in knowing. So we are really honored to have the Chief here to talk about what's up on the Supreme Court. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you, Justice Reif.
Thank you, Mayor.
Just as a broad question to get started with for our audience, can you kind of set up and describe the judicial system as it's laid out constitutionally for the state of Oklahoma?
Yes. Article 7 of the Oklahoma Constitution is our judicial article. And in that judicial article, the courts are created and empowered, vested specifically with the judicial power of the state. The Constitution creates three types of courts: the appellate courts, the trial courts, and what are called special courts. The appellate courts, of course, are the Supreme Court and our coordinate Court of Criminal Appeals. The intermediate appellate court in Oklahoma is the Court of Civil Appeals. The trial courts consist of our district courts, and those special courts I mentioned are the Court on the Judiciary, the Court of Tax Review, and the Court of Bank Review. Those are the constitutional courts under the judicial article.
So there is an intermediate court of civil appeals, but there's no intermediate court of criminal appeals.
That's correct. The appeals go directly to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and they don't have a helper court as the Supreme Court does in the civil arena.
And where does the state Supreme Court fall into all that?
We are constitutionally charged with having superintending power over all the courts, and even though the Court of Criminal Appeals is a coordinate court of last resort, in matters of superintendence, we have that responsibility under the Constitution.
And as Chief Justice, what are your responsibilities as opposed to the rest of the court?
The Chief Justice is the head of the judicial branch of government. Much like the governor is the head of the executive branch of government, the Speaker of the House and President pro tempore of the Senate are the head of the legislative branch of government. The Chief Justice is the head and the spokesman for the judicial branch of government. I might add that it's more like the analogy that I use is the Chief Justice is the CEO, the remainder of the court is the board of directors, and there are some things the chief is expected to take the initiative on. Others, the chief executes the policy set by the whole court.
Now the court has a relationship, superintending or otherwise, with the Oklahoma Bar Association as well, the organization that regulates the lawyers. They just don't do that any way they want to. They do it according to the dictates of the court.
Yes, and that's one of our constitutional powers, one of our constitutional functions, is to regulate the practice of law in the state of Oklahoma. We do that through the auspices of the Bar Association, the leadership, the governance of the Bar Association. We feel like we get a better management of those resources by placing them in the hands of those that are directly affected by the operation of the Bar Association.
I know from time to time I've seen inaccurate reporting, certainly not out of the court, but in publications, that would seem to indicate that the Bar Association has complete control over what happens with lawyers. To some extent that's true, but the Bar Association still has to account for its actions to the court.
Absolutely. Every year the court approves the budget of the Oklahoma Bar Association. We review any policies that the Board of Governors adopts and implements concerning the practice of law. We are very directly involved in lawyer disciplinary matters. In fact, the ultimate authority that's non-delegable, we couldn't give it to the Bar Association if we wanted to. It resides with the Supreme Court over lawyer misconduct.
You reside in the eastern part of the Tulsa metro, obviously the work in a majority of the time in Oklahoma City. How do you handle that commute back and forth?
Well, I travel with my law clerks. Each of them have an inbox. During those commutes, one clerk gets half the trip to go over her inbox with me. The other clerk gets the other half of that trip.
So once you get to Stroud, they switch roles? Is that the way it works?
Approximately. Sometimes the work is so heavy that it's one clerk gets the trip over and one gets the trip back.
How often do you commute back and forth?
Daily.
Daily commute?
Yes.
I see. Yeah. Well, you must keep pretty late hours then.
Or
early hours, one or the other.
I get up at 4 every morning. And I go to bed somewhere between 9:30 and 10. It doesn't leave much of a life, but it's a life I like and I'm comfortable with.
You mentioned you started your professional career as a police officer in Owasso. Do you ever draw back on those experiences? Because you can't get more real life, down to earth in the justice system than being a police officer on the street. And here you are at the, I guess, the other end of the law enforcement and legal aspect. Do you ever rely on some of those experiences?
Very much.
Give me an example.
Well, I learn more in general. I learn more about human nature. And lawyers and judges, we are the problem solvers for the people. Our remedy is the law, and sometimes that remedy is not the best, but it's the remedy that we have to give the people in solving disputes and problems. I got to see those problems and disputes firsthand. They didn't come to me through a record in a case or even from testimony in a trial courtroom. The police officer is often the only resource, maybe not the most appropriate or the best resource, but I draw on my experiences, that direct firsthand encounter with people and their problems.
You know, we're seeing a lot of videotape now of police officers, and everybody's got a cell phone now, and a lot of times that winds up in the legal system. Now, it may not go to the Supreme Court just because of the nature of the activity, but you must have opinions when suddenly all eyes of the nation seeming to be on a police officer's actions out in the field.
Well, most of the time, that video, as telling as it may be, is not the complete picture. It's not the whole story. There may be circumstances that are off camera that gave those officers a reason to be heightened in fear, maybe react on camera what seems to be excessive, but without the complete picture, without the complete background, it's hard to make a judgment just on the basis of those videos.
It seems to me that there is a similarity, at least, in the demeanor expected of a Supreme Court justice on the one hand, and the demeanor expected of the police officer on the street. You got to have good temperament, you've got to be restrained, you've got to be firm. Do you ever draw back on any of that?
I think I have pretty much been the same person, whether I've been a police officer on the street or a judge on the bench. All of those qualities that you just mentioned, every good police officer that I know, and the majority of the police officers that serve, have all of those qualities you just mentioned.
Chief Justice John Reif is our guest today on The Verdict. We'll be back with another segment right after this.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now, and it starts with Oklahoma.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We're back on the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers and Chief Justice John Reif.
Mr. Chief Justice, can you distinguish for our viewers in a very general way the responsibilities of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on the one hand and an Associate Justice of the Court on the other?
Yes, the Chief Justice has primary responsibility for the administrative management of the court, the fiscal management of the court, not just the Supreme Court and the appellate courts that I've mentioned, but the trial courts as well. In fact, we're currently in the process of looking at the budgets for all 77 district courts. We've just completed our financial adventure with the legislature concerning the funding of the judicial branch of government. The Chief Justice plays a leadership role in that process and is responsible for the daily administrative and financial affairs of the judicial branch of government. An Associate Justice, although we share many of the tasks, the Chief regularly calls upon the other members of the court to serve as a liaison. For example, Justice Cogger serves as a liaison to the Bar Association, Justice Winchester to the court clerks. The Chief Justice has that resource and uses the other members of the court as a liaison, but primarily the Associate Justices have the judge work of the court as their primary focus. And I look forward to the day where I can return to my judge work.
We ask a lot of judges. We know they're human, but we ask them to be impartial. What's the importance of independence when it comes to our judges?
It is critical to the proper functioning of the checks and balances that the framers of the Oklahoma Constitution built into our system of government. In fact, the framers were very, very specific that we would have 3 co-equal branches of government. And that's the language of the Constitution. That's not the Chief Justice or the Supreme Court saying that. That's the people saying we want 3 co-equal branches of government. The independence of the judiciary, the critical aspect in that regard stems from the fact that we exercise our power and make our decisions in the context of particular disputes. Whereas the policy-making branches of government, the governor and the legislative branches, they can consider a broader field of information than courts do, looking at and confined to the record of a particular case or a particular dispute. And we feel like that in order to maintain the impartiality that's expected, the neutrality that's expected in resolving those disputes, we have to be independent of political influences. We have to be independent of any other social or economic influence as well. The case should be decided on the basis of the facts and the law. That's what the people expect from us, and that's what we take an oath to fulfill.
Talk about, just a minute, the workload of the court as it stands now. Is it increasing, decreasing, staying about the same? What's happening to the workload at the Supreme Court level?
In my 7.5 years at the court, it's remained stable in terms of the total number of cases. I would say, though, where we see the fluctuations and the shifts is in the type of cases. A few years ago, we saw an increase in the number of foreclosure cases in the hard mortgage
2008, 2009 time period?
Yes, we did. Those have decreased, but they've been replaced now with litigation that has been spawned by legislative changes. For example, we have an increase in cases based upon changes in the new Workers' Compensation Act, changes based on the Tort Reform Act as well. And I might add that the court doesn't go looking for those cases. There seems to be this perception that the legislature does their work and only to have the court undo that work. Well, we only do that in response to a suit brought by a citizen of this state, and I think it's very important to remember that the voice of the individual citizens is just as important as the voice of the legislature, and they have a right to a day in court. Now, we approach that legislation with the presumption that it's valid legislation. But when a citizen can show some infirmity in the legislation, the courts have no choice but to act and to give relief.
The U.S. Constitution, well over 200 years old, and we often marvel at how well it still reads today and how appropriate and applicable it can be, and for the most part, other than the amendments that have been added through the years. What about the state constitution? Over 100 years old now. How well has it survived through the decades, and how relevant is it today? And how many changes would you, if you had a golden wand, would you toss over it?
Actually, it has stood the test of time very well. With the exception of the amendment to the judicial article in 1967, we went from a system of localized courts into a system what is referred to as the unified court system. The judicial article was overhauled, and I think necessarily, rightfully so. The impetus for that, of course, was the scandal of the Supreme Court bribery scandals in the early 60s. However, on the whole, the structure in the Constitution for the executive branch and the legislative branch, the constitutional provision for a corporation commission, it has stood the test of time very well.
The Oklahoma Constitution is, of course, the superintending authority, and it tells the court generally how to operate. But if a citizen tries a case in district court, we'll say, has his case tried, his or hers, and a final order is issued, it's over at the district court level, pretty much they have an absolute right to appeal, but
yes,
they don't have an absolute right to appeal to the Supreme Court. Could you explain how that works?
Well, it's interesting that you should frame it that way, because all appeals are filed in the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. We retain only about 5% of the appeals. The other 95% are assigned to the Court of Civil Appeals, who provides the right of appeal, the right of appellate review for that judgment that you've just referred to. And I might add, our Court of Appeals, our Court of Civil Appeals, is a workhorse court. They do an outstanding job. They serve the people very, very well. Occasionally, we find it necessary to review the opinions and decisions of the Court of Civil Appeals, mm-hmm, and we do that through a process called certiorari review.
Are the standards for your certiorari review similar to the standards of the U.S. Supreme Court for review?
They're very, very comparable, yes.
What about the new building? People in Oklahoma City are very excited. A very important historical building, been remodeled over the last 10 years, and
yeah, it's beautiful.
The new home of the state Supreme Court.
We're very proud of the building. I tell everyone, and I would like to invite you, I would like to invite the citizens of Oklahoma to come and visit the court building. It's one of their buildings as well as the Capitol. We have artwork in the building that makes it almost a museum, like a visit to a museum. That building, it would have been a crime if it had been cast aside, demolished, rather than the legislature having the foresight to fund its renovation and its expansion by a bond issue. It is a treasure for the people, and we would love to have the people come and visit their judicial center.
Got about 30 seconds left. What should the people know about the state Supreme Court in Oklahoma?
We are the word I like to use is we are their bulwark. We are there to arbitrate their grievances, their disputes with the other branches of government. We do that in a way that is, we think, an impartial and neutral decision-making process. We protect the people's rights. I don't have a better way to put it, Mayor.
And we're going to make that the
That's
final
very
word.
well said.
Chief Justice John Reif, thanks for coming on The Verdict.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
There are now 11 million of us who live here and work here. I was 15 when I came here 6 years ago. I raised my family here. I drive my truck to my job every day. The only difference between now and 6 years ago, I do it legally. I wanted to. Because this is my home.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
We are a very conservative family, and we believe in old-fashioned family values. We have a loving home there, and we love kids, and we have 5, 6 of our own. And but I had no idea we were going to go into adoption, but it's been very gratifying.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of the verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Chief Justice John Reif, our guest today.
Yes, very pleased to have him come out and share his time with us. He's a very busy guy, and it's difficult to break away and come do our show, but we really are grateful, and I know our viewers enjoyed it.
We ought to take him up on his offer to come visit the state Supreme Court building.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because I've been there a number of times. It's just as he described it.
Solomon Layton designed the state capitol, the Skirvin Hotel, what's now the OCU Law School, and this building. And
it used to be the State Historical Society.
That's right, and they got a new building, and the state rightly invested and remodeled the old one. It's a beautiful building, and he mentioned the artwork is worth the trip by itself. We have a website information to give you. His website is oscn.net. That's oscn.net, Oklahoma Supreme Court.net. And we have a website, theverdict.tv. Love for you to tell us about a guest you'd like to see on a future edition. That'll do it. We'll see you later.